The AfterDeath Journal of an American Philosopher, The Worldview of William James, by Jane Roberts. And this was one of Jane Roberts' last books. It was published in 1978. The copyright is 1978. And I think this is a fascinating book. So I'm going to read the whole thing with the introduction, and I'm not going to abridge it. So I'm not going to cut out the parts where Rob talks about what's happening in Jane and Rob's life, because I find all that fascinating. I mean, it just adds to the story, doesn't it? Okay, so here we go. This is the first part. It's the introduction, and the title of the introduction is called Front Door People, Back Door People, and Worldviews. I find myself with still another unconventional manuscript left at the back door of my mind. The pages fluttered down into my awareness, one by one, as if left by some invisible newspaper boy. Day after day, the latest installments in a steady line of communications that seems to come from strange lands. Without painting this analogy in too glowing colors, I'd like to point out my feelings that the conscious mind is like a house of awareness with an elegant front door, through which we receive usual callers and messages. Hello, how are you? State your name and business. This front entrance is swept and well tended. To its doorstep come all official magazines and newspapers. The shrubs of our beliefs are trimmed and pruned, and the regular mailman, whistling cheerfully, leaves the mail at the proper anticipated times. Neat curtained windows look out to the well-organized streets of the world, and we're told that all the messages must come to us through that front door, the only entrance or exit. But no matter what we're told by all the officials and authorities, we seem to remember a secret back door from the time of our childhood, a magic entrance that we discovered when we were left by ourselves, perhaps on rainy afternoons, a door that opened into other worlds. Vaguely we may recall finding and opening that door on innumerable, nearly forgotten occasions. We may have sensed messengers coming and going. Once or twice we may even have found strange packages or papers on the back door stoop, wet with rain, as if they'd been waiting there for a long time. But the next time we look, the door is invisible. The wall of awareness is smooth, and we can see only the whitewashed walls that we've been taught to expect. Some of us are just too stubborn and curious to ignore those unofficial events, so symbolically speaking at least. While I keep my front door well tended, I've learned to watch at the back door of my mind. And now and then I stand on the mind's back porch, and sometimes I take a few tentative steps down unofficial paths that lead to unexplored psychological lands that might just correlate with other realities than the one we know. The AfterDeath Journal of an American Philosopher was automatically delivered. Then, at that back mental doorstep, the installments appearing day after day, while I went about my business. Winter turned to spring, and the regular magazines and papers brought by the postman kept me up to date on the official world. Those periodicals are easy to read. They're written for the front door people. But we're all both front door people and back door people, whether we know it or not. The trouble is that we know how to read the important news that comes to us through the exterior world, but often we just don't know what to do with the equally valid messages that come by the unofficial back route. For one thing, the messages left by inspiration or the intuitions are highly personal, intimate, left at our back doorstep and no other, and they have to be read by the part of the mind that is peculiarly suited to their translation. They may deal with symbols, for example, instead of the good, clear alphabets that we are used to. Sometimes their messages may even seem to contradict the news that comes in the front door. And not only can't we confirm the data with our neighbors, but we have to restructure our own thinking before we can even accept it ourselves. So at first, I didn't know how to interpret this present manuscript either. Should it be taken literally or symbolically? I tried to put together my knowledge of reality as it comes to me through official and unofficial sources of information, and to use all my intellectual and intuitive abilities to find the answer. Our ordinary consciousness is turned towards our front door collars, and when our physical senses are stimulated, the front doorbell rings, and we respond to whomever or whatever wants our attention. Usually, we're so busy responding to those messages that if the back doorbell rings, we don't even notice. I've learned to tune my consciousness toward the back of my mental house, and always to keep a portion of my attention focused in that direction. In a manner of speaking, I have my own messenger from those unknown psychological realms. Like many people, my husband Rob and I have a small yard in the rear of our house, but beyond that there are hills and forests. In my analogy, these represent the unofficial areas of the psyche. Down those natural, untended banks rush winds from the psychological skies, and messages tumbling like small speckled exotic stones. My trans-personality, Seth, comes into my consciousness from those other inner landscapes. Twice a week he comes through my mind's back door, and he takes an honored place in our living room. I go into trance and he begins to speak, while Rob takes notes. Seth writes his own books in this fashion, explaining the greater realms of consciousness that exist outside our cozy villages of mind. It was in the middle of one such occasion, the 717th for November 4th, 1974, that I first became acquainted with William James, the well-known American psychologist and philosopher who died in 1910. This is what happened. Mentally, I saw a small paperback book, opened midway through, and I knew that it was titled The Varieties of Religious States. At first, the book was in miniature, but it grew larger, so that I could read it clearly, sentence by sentence. At the same time, I knew that somehow the book was written by William James. I was already familiar with James's name, since several years previously I'd partially skimmed through his Varieties of Religious Experience, a book that Rob really enjoyed, though I didn't particularly. James's reputation as a psychologist also came up in our reading matter now and then. I explained to Rob what was happening, and then, while he took notes, I read out loud the pages that I saw. We both took it for granted that the image of the book in my mind's eye was symbolic, but the message I read was quite literal and literate. I found James more personally likable from these passages than I did from the real book of his that I'd read. More than this, I felt that the copy itself also contained James's emotions and feelings, which were somehow played back when you read the words. This wasn't all. As described in my own book, Psychic Politics, during that same session, other material came through, supposedly from another dead psychologist, Carl Jung. I was intrigued by James' quaint, rather elegant prose, and rather taken aback by the uneven exuberance with which Jung material showed itself. Mostly My front door was startled by the implications of the entire affair. So we just let the whole thing slide by. Seth didn't. He instantly began a series of sessions on worldviews. Briefly stated, Seth says that the feelings and experiences of each person continue to exist after death, and that these can be perceived under certain conditions. In other words, each of us has a unique version of reality that makes up our private worldview. This is not just a passive perception of multidimensional properties, but an active, volatile phenomenon that interacts at many levels with other worldviews and combines with them. People who read the New York Times must first have an interest in that particular paper and must then take certain steps to buy it or to have it delivered. They'll also probably have some interest in characteristics in common with other people who read the same paper. So, according to Seth, certain worldviews are perceived by people whose interests, desires, or characteristics somehow fall into the same general area as the particular worldview involved. Still, I found the entire matter of messages from the famous dead hard to take, worldviews or no. While Seth continued to dictate his book, The Unknown Reality, I finished my own, Psychic Politics, and started a sequel to my novel, The Education of Oversoul 7. Then, once again, the unexpected happened, and this time it was triggered by a domestic event. I asked Rob what he wanted for Christmas, for the Christmas of 1975. He answered, a book on Cezanne, meaning Paul Cezanne, the French artist who died at the beginning of the century. 2 mornings afterwards, unable to sleep, I got up and went to the typewriter. To put it mildly, the signals started flying. Beginning that dawn, I received an entire manuscript, The Worldview of Paul Cezanne, which was published by Prentice Hall in 1977. In this case, my love for Rob and my desire to get him what he wanted merged with my knowledge of the mind's greater resources. I sent out my unconscious message and tuned into precisely what I wanted. Yet I was never consciously aware of making any such efforts at all. What was delivered to my mind's back door was a view of the world as seen through an artist's eyes, and Cezanne, at least as he appears in the manuscript, didn't care for much. Cezanne, at least as he appears in the manuscript, didn't care for much besides painting. The book was devoted to the meaning of art, its greater implications and technique. My Cezanne didn't care what happened to the world since his time. He said nothing about life after death. His focus was undeviatingly unique and carried the indelible stamp of his personality. When Cezanne was finished, I got back to the matter at hand, my sequel to 7. I put the James episode out of my mind, and then one afternoon in May 1976, thoughts of James suddenly began to intrude as I worked on my own book. I found myself feeling some very definite emotional connections with James, as if, God forbid, we were reincarnationally involved or had some background in common. I say, God forbid, because reincarnation is one of those subjects that I agree with in theory. And then she says, in brackets, with certain changes, such as the existence of simultaneous time, close bracket. But I have trouble with it in practical terms. I shook my head, frowning at myself. The idea was too pat, too obvious, a psychic cliche. So I put my feelings aside and went back to my writing. But again, didn't Seth didn't let me get away with it. That night at our regular session, instead of dictating his own book, Seth delivered some excellent material on the nature of consciousness. And Rob, knowing my attitude, grinned often as he watched me while Seth spoke about my relationship with William James. The implications of that session are fascinating, though, and important to all of us, as Seth traces the ever-changing patterns of human consciousness and desires. It was a warm, humid evening, and the house and neighborhood were still as Seth began to speak. As usual, Rob took notes, and the following is a verbatim account of that previously unpublished session. And that concludes the first part of the introduction. And I'd like to say here, if you're enjoying this or you want to hear more from this book, please like and subscribe and comment, if you will.